Um, and yeah, welcome everyone to our first online session for the 2025 CIS conference, which I'm very excited about, called Political Economy and Rural Central Asia. So this was not a pre-formed panel, but it's one of the ones that I think worked out really well because we have four very interesting papers that deal with various aspects of political economy, resettlement, and rural Central Asia, which I'm especially excited to hear about. So we'll follow, I was going to follow the order in the program because Gulnoza is not here. We'll start with you, um, Dr. Akizhanov. And um, Dr. Akizhanov will be telling us about the political economy of income and wealth inequality in Kazakhstan. You have 20 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next presenter. And then towards the end of the session, I'll provide a few comments, and then we'll have opportunity for rounds of questions.
So
So
shall I
take it
start?
away. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to share my PowerPoints. Um, okay, and Nicholas, can I ask you, like, I didn't hear if you warned, like, when there are like 10 minutes left, you will give me a signal, and then 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. I'll give you 5 and 3 minute warnings. How about that?
Okay, great. Okay, so I will talk about the political economy of income and wealth inequality in Kazakhstan today. Um so obviously, this inequality should be understood in the context of transition from the socialist country to the capitalist society and economy, and that income inequality was marked by high GDP growth, and I'm emphasizing that to show that in contrast to the so-called mainstream neoclassical economics and orthodox view, there is no such thing as uh, in the growing economy will lift all boats. Actually, it's getting even worse. Okay, so this in this context, you can see how I don't know to what extent you're acquainted with the what's going on with the Kazakh economy, but basically it's the largest economy in Central Asia. This year again, IMF projects that Kazakhstan Kazakh GDP per capita will suppress those in Russia and China, and let alone that economies of other Central Asians are lagging behind. However, this this economic growth, the ideas of doubling GDP, which wasn't pronounced by President Tokayev 2 years ago, that all doesn't unfortunately it unfortunately obscures understanding the reasons for the issue of the problem of inequality, let alone why it is increasing. And we have these terrible numbers, especially for the experts to understand. But here you can see that the most important the dynamics. Maybe the numbers are not that awful, but the dynamics here, we know that top 1% of richest people, their share of wealth is increasing from almost 14%, and in 10 years it's now almost 15%. Whereas the bottom 50% of the Kazakh population, which is half of the population basically, their wealth is declining. Okay, and the dynamics is very negative one. So basically, Kazakh economy exhibits one of the highest inequality rates in Eurasia, where we compare it with. My theoretical, my vantage point, the vantage point I'm using is a critical political economy. So there's some works from people like Hudson, Sayre, Christopher's, Sanher and Santabaldieva, who published book in 2021 about Central Asia, very good one. My own works on political economy of Kazakhstan and finance capitalism, where I am also like on a deeper level. It's also about my work is based on the critical realism, philosophy of critical realism, which explains why neoclassical, the orthodox approach to inequality cannot help us to understand the main reasons behind the income inequality. And here, why it is important to engage with a critical political economy approach. Okay, so that to understand those numbers. Again, just some examples. The, the dynamics is that the Kazakh economy for the last, I would argue that even for the last 30 years, there has been a constant upward income redistribution, whereas only 1% or at least at most 10% of upper middle urban population would increase their wealth at the expense of the rest of the population. Okay, so you can see some numbers. What is interesting is that institutions such as UBS stands for, it's a financial institution, it's a bank, it's not some kind of Oxfam kind of progressive institution. It For the last 2 years, I was following its publications, and it's interestingly how it proclaims Kazakhstan a very like a good place, among top 3 places where you really need to come and make money. I don't know how they do that, but they basically project they should work in our tax authorities because they know for sure how many millionaires there will be. Okay, so maybe 20 to 30 years ago we could argue that, well, the more there are rich people in the country, the better. But this is not the case. This is yet another evidence that unfortunately the more billionaires we have in China or in Russia or now in Kazakhstan, I'm talking about, the better for the population. It means that the economy actually is very much skewed. Okay, so again, some examples. Now, that was some projections were made before Qatar and after Qatar. It's the January outbreak of protest in 2022. So this is the example which is like confirmed by more or less official institutions like KPMG, which shows that 162 individuals controlled almost 50% of total wealth in Kazakhstan. Okay, and the number of population which could be attributed to the more or less a conventional understanding of middle class is less than 3%. Okay, in contrast to the 30% globally and 71% in advanced economies. Even though, I would argue that in US and UK, the situation with income inequality is also very bad. Okay, so again, why it is important to understand income inequality and what behind it. At the beginning, I mentioned that Kazakh economy is the largest in Central Asia, and there is a positive economic growth and GDP per capita is increasing. But I will not go into the details. But basically, heterodox economists and critical political economists for some time already made an argument that we should reject this notion of GDP per capita because it doesn't reflect the real situation with socioeconomic well-being. And so if we adjust inequality to the human development, which is more or less, Kazakhstan officially belongs to upper middle countries or, upper developed countries in human index. But if we adjust inequality, then we immediately lose almost 9% of that. Okay, and that reflects the disparities which exist in reality in terms of access to education, to healthcare, to some other public services. Okay, so of course, since I'm talking about critical political economy stance, the deeper roots lies behind the reason of wealth and income inequality, rise in income and wealth inequality is of course structural and institution. And in we believe that most of the heterodox economists and neoliberal, critical political economists, is that you cannot explain this using this kind of neoclassical approach, mathematical deductivism. It's not about education. It's not about desire of people to be entrepreneurs or to be poor, as they would argue. It's not about rational people. It's the consequences of this neoliberal transition that's been going on for almost 30 years now, and the dominance of the so-called Washington consensus. I'll not go into the details, but basically it's all about favor. At the end of the day, it's favoring capital over labor. Okay, in my own research, I divide this stage of neoliberal hegemony in Kazakhstan into three stages. The first one, interestingly, started even when Kazakhstan was part of the Soviet Union, because that was in since 1989 when Gorbachev started its reforms of perestroika and glasnost, and when this first kind of pro-market ideas has begun to penetrate, intellectuals and mainstream economists. Okay, so these pro-market ideas emerged, especially became strong after the collapse of Soviet Union. Then 1995 is marked by the adoption of new constitution, which made Kazakhstan really authoritarian state. Here in Kazakhstan, of course, in Kazakhstan, would use all kind of euphemisms such as a super presidential state and so on and so forth. But that constitution actually institutionalized and normalized those institutions, neoliberal institutions that help to continue upward redistribution. Now we live in a punitive stage, that there have been so many scholars during the 2008 financial crisis who said, and political activists who said, oh, look, now this started, okay? This movement of 1%, that now, capitalism is over, something has to be changed. But no way. We, as an example, in so many countries, in country after countries, they adopted policies such as too big to fail, and actually bail out those institutions, financial institutions, which actually caused financial crisis. And that was also an example of upward redistribution. Of course, behind this neoliberal restructuring, very strong ideological and policy dimensions. I will not go again into the details of this kind of labor capital dichotomy, but what is important to understand is that part of this ideological dominance is the adoption of a total dominance of neoclassical economics, which is used by our economic technocrats. And what is interesting, that the so-called opposition, whoever, especially liberal economists who consider themselves in a kind of dissidents, they actually apply the same very, instruments of the neoclassical economics, namely mathematical deductivism, which is very much, doesn't deal with the reality, because they're not doing with, not applying the instruments of political economy. Okay, and examples of this, here are two examples, a very small one. Except not only Kazakhstan, but most of the countries are obsessed with GDP growth. They believe that once there is an economic growth, then it will be possible to fight poverty, to deal with inequality, to industrialize, and to achieve all goals. Sometimes, in especially neoliberal narratives in society, by both urban middle class and liberal economists use these narratives about uh, uh, financial inclusion, microcrediting, and how it apparently helps people to fight poverty. Okay, so again, this is a kind of I argue that Kazakhstan is a classical neoliberal state where the state is part of these mechanisms. Okay, and since I made the case that we live in a punitive stage of neoliberalism, there is no, whenever there is any reform, any kind of new agenda, so-called new agenda, it always consists of the same recepts which had been used in the early 1990s or 2000s. Okay, even like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when President Tokayev in his address, people address, urged, to come up with some economic reforms. All economists ended up just proposing the same very recepts. Okay, it's about privatization, it's about more commodification, and basically just exporting more oil. Okay, what are the implications? Of course, implications are very much well known, described in literature, but we do witness it that in Kazakhstan, and the worst one is that back in 2022, in January, as I already mentioned, we had the first kind of open protest, the so-called Bloody January, Kantar, Kantar, which is to many scholars is the classical, example of class struggle. Okay, there may be many explanations why it happened, because of succession process, because of I don't know, the increase of prices, but at the end of the day, it was a classical class protest about this inequality. So what to do? Again, as I mentioned, even those who understand or more or less pretend that they understand that the income inequalities are unbearable in Kazakhstan, they still keep proposing the same very recipes that caused this widening wealth and income inequality. Okay, so that's why we need what I call paradigm shift. Again, many liberal economists or dissidents, they use these words such as decolonization. But apart from that, I don't have these examples, but in my other slides, I have these examples how the cultural neoliberal narrative, or the so-called progressive neoliberalism, now is dominant in Kazakhstan. Okay, when again and again the so-called ideas of inclusion, okay, or women entrepreneurship, or microcrediting, or financial literacy, they disattract attention from the structural and class-based issues, okay, especially of the issues redistribution. So that basically all I wanted to say again, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. I don't know how we'll build it after right now or later on with
Yeah, I
questions.
was thinking we could do all of the questions together at the end, maybe split up the remaining time and give people time to answer. Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Akizhanov. This was a really fantastic presentation, and I'm excited to discuss it further at the end of the session.
Yes, thank you.
And round of applause, everyone. Thank you. So next up we have Gulnoza Akhmedova. Gulnoza, are you okay? I've seen you've entered the room. Is your camera and audio working?
Hello, everyone. It's very nice to meet colleagues and co-researchers. I'm very sorry I entered a bit late and missed
No,
my
it's okay.
slot. I'm happy to use this opportunity.
Yeah, so really quickly, just to introduce you. So Gulnoza Akhmedova is with the UNDP, and will be presenting on negotiating access to water, the study of practices of female farmers in rural Uzbekistan. So Gulnoza, you have up to 20 minutes. I'll give you a 5-minute and 3-minute warning. So take it away.
So yes, as it was mentioned, I currently work for UNDP as a national gender consultant, and I would like to present the research I conducted in basically November 2024 as part of my graduate degree. It's called Negotiating Access to Water, and it studies informal and practices of female farmers when accessing water for irrigation. So in this research, I have identified specific barriers that women face when accessing water for irrigation. I would like to say that in general, women farmers represent a very small proportion of landowners and farm owners, only 7%. But majority of women are involved as smallholder or household farmers. And availability of water is strongly correlated with food security. As you know, water is one of the main ingredients in farming in rural areas. And Uzbekistan is applying principles, at least on paper, of integrated water resources management is internationally recognized standard. And according to these principles, the country should make provide laws that provide equitable use of water for all water users, farmers, smallholder farmers, household farmers, etc. But despite this, at the community level, female farmers, which are, by the way, taking more responsibility for managing water due to outmigration of men in rural areas, are facing difficulties. The literature review suggests that as for gender analysis conducted by UNDP and FAO and other organizations, water management is a male job. Basically, it's men who manage irrigation, if we are talking about farms. However, as I said before, due to out-migration of men, women have to take on this role, and the literature suggests that they were facing challenges, and I was interested what kind of challenges those women are facing, because it was not well defined in the literature. And I have chosen the very small village in Fergana region, which is one of the most populated regions in Uzbekistan for research, and try to identify gender differentiated factors accounting for access of female farmers to water, and try to understand what formal and informal practices they use, and in which context this negotiation happens. I've applied a gender theoretical framework, which is basically was designed by USAID to conduct gender analysis. It looks at 4 domains: assets, agency, rules, and power, in which formal laws, policies, and also informal norms, cultural norms are related to rules, gender roles, responsibilities, time use is related to agency, and access and control over resources is related to assets, and to what extent different people can make decisions, access to decision making is considered power. All of these domains can be connected to water management, as they influence bargaining power of women when they negotiate their access to water. Conceptually, access to water in this research is defined as ability of women to use and benefit from resources such as water. Negotiating access to water is defined as using both formal and informal practices that women can use to ensure the access to water. And there are different types of farming. So when I say farmers or female farmers, is naturally it's big farms that land consists of from 1 to 10 hectares of land, and the agricultural activities are specified with the contract made with local governors or Hokimiyat. Smallholder or dehqan farms are relatively smaller, up to 1 hectares of land, and they can be registered as self-employed, but mostly they are more flexible to choose which crops they want to tend. And household farms are very much tinier plots of land. It's basically their household gardens, where again mostly it's women or Kilens who are engaged in subsistence farming. In Uzbekistan, water management is controlled by water users association. So it's a small group of farmers engaging in membership in this association in order to manage irrigation and drainage system. So the main responsibility of water users association is to ensure reliable use of water for all water users. They collect service fees, and also oversee maintenance of water canals. So I have used both primary and secondary data. The primary data was obtained by conducting expert interviews with NGO representatives, experts in water management, and also focus groups, discussions with a group of female farmers and a group of household and smallholder farmers. And I have looked at reports and research papers on different challenges women face also in other countries. So basically, it's more it's a qualitative research again, and the findings indicate that the context where negotiation happens is it's a rural setting. Yeah, we are talking about large-scale migration. Most of the farmers I interviewed, especially smallholder household farmers, have their relatives, husbands in not around, basically in Russia, anywhere else. And we are talking about, during the interviews, there was some identified problems, which I would call gender-based violence, and I will go for it further. And we are talking about overrepresentation of women in informal sector, in informal labor, and large-scale unemployment in formal employment is missing in rural areas, and in Uzbekistan in general, female farmers have face such issues as lack of agricultural inputs, lack of access to extension services, and land in general. They're, as I said, underrepresented in land ownership. So I have applied all these 4 domains to access to water and looked at to what extent they are engaged in the decision-making over water, to what extent our laws are gender sensitive, to what extent female farmers have access to resources such as water scheduling information, water delivery information, and other alternative sources of water. So we have water from channels, it's surface water, but also there is underground water and as an alternative. And in addition, agency is the gender roles make result in time constraints and the use of informal practices to access water. What was identified clearly from the beginning that only farmers, like persons owning large amount of land, are allowed to be included in water users associations, and those farmers pay their annual fees for water, participate in the maintenance of canals, and however, women were female farmers stated that they are not effectively engaged in decision making because mostly meetings are conducted in male-only spaces, like chaykhanas, where women don't usually go, or even when those meetings are conducted in more formal settings, like in governance or hakimiyats, they said that they don't tend to participate in them because they are too shy to voice their opinions. And also understood that cultural and religious factors contribute to them having difficulty expressing their opinions. While smallholder and household farmers are not able to hold any membership in water users associations because they are not considered legal entities. And usually it was the youngest female member of the family responsible for managing water for the household garden or kitchen garden, we call them. And Helens in Uzbek families have the least bargaining power, let alone in the community. And and they lack bargaining power at all. And if you talk about institutional support for farmers, it's usually Hokimiyat who provides support, and for smallholder and household farms, it's Mahalla institution or community level institution. And the similarity is both of them stated they don't receive support from this institution in accessing water. So this is a little bit complicated table. I've differentiated here what kind of challenges are faced by household smallholder farmers, what kind of challenges are faced by female farmers, like owners of big farm. And so I think I have already summarized most of what is there. And the result of this absence of formal routes of accessing water is informal, that both all three categories of farmers, female farmers, utilize informal methods of accessing water. And they said that they either use drainage water from neighboring farms or they steal water from neighboring farms, which was stealing water. It's for smallholder and household farmers, and they said that they go out at night, wait for the water, when the farmer will not guarding his land, and would open this channel to their land plot. And because they also don't have any information on water scheduling, so they don't quite know when this water is coming, they have to spend hours near water channels waiting for water to arrive. And yeah, as the result is that during especially dry season, which is we call Chilla in Uzbekistan, it's June, July, August, they only are able to access water only once or not at all, and which leads to crop, which leads them losing most of their crops, and they subsequently for big farms, it also leads to losing land, because if they don't perform according to the contract, the governors just take away the land. And because female smallholder and household farmers are entirely excluded from formal institutions, it means they are risking a lot when utilizing informal methods, and nobody guarantees their security, as if in these conditions at night, if they are seen by farmers, they might also face gender-based violence. And which means that female household farmers are at the bottom of the value chain, and this increases their vulnerability, especially with climate change related water scarcity, and they start to utilize alternative options to livelihood, obtain livelihood, such as engaging more in informal labor. Okay. I'd like just to conclude that informal farming or small-scale farming, which smallholder farmers and kitchen farmers engaged in, provides for 80% of agricultural production in Uzbekistan, which is very important. And poor access to water their poor access to water might be directly causing food and economic insecurity, not only to those farmers, but also to the country as a whole. And I have designed some recommendations here. It's basically involving all water users in water users association. So providing formal pathways for all types of farmers and changing social and cultural norms, and participation rates of women in water users associations, addressing discrimination in accessing and controlling water, and designing interventions to increase women's access to irrigation water. Also countering gender-based violence, discrimination and harassment that is associated with accessing water. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Gulnoza. That was really wonderful. I have many questions to ask, but we'll get to that shortly. So good work. Yeah, I'm also really interested in several of these questions, and I also have some recommendations of other scholarship you might want to check out in Tajikistan, where people are answering different questions in case you're not aware. But before we get to that, we have two more presentations. So next up, we'll be hearing a joint presentation from Farhad Ehsani and Malika Kartanbaeva, both from the American University at Central Asia. And they'll be talking about From Homeland to Ancestral Land, Economic Adaptation Strategies of Afghan Kyrgyz after Resettlement. Same thing, I'll give you 20 minutes and give you 5-minute and 3-minute warning.
Malika, could you please share the presentation? So, hello everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. Today we are going to talk, we are going to present our research about Afghan Kyrgyz in Kyrgyzstan. So before going to the main part, I would like to give you a very short overview. I strongly believe that Central Asia and Afghanistan has like more connection, and one of those connection is the minorities in Afghanistan, which they have somehow a relation to Central Asian countries. One of those minorities is Afghan Kyrgyz, which they were mainly living in this area, Vakhan corridor. And since 2017, 2019, and 2021, different groups of Afghan Kyrgyz were resettled in Kyrgyzstan. Like in 2017, 50 Afghan Kyrgyz were resettled. In 2019, another 50 Afghan Kyrgyz were resettled in Kyrgyzstan. And in 2021, like another group, but we don't have a specific statistics. But what I know is that they were resettled mainly in 3 geographical areas. 3 families in Kara-Balta, which is very close to Bishkek, and 1 family is in Narin, and the largest group is in Osh, which is the south of Kyrgyzstan. The area which they are resettled is called Alay Valley, Taldeso, and Burgeso village. Yeah, a couple of interesting research is about Afghan Kyrgyz, and one of the first one which took place in Afghanistan is by Nazif Shahrani. Actually, he is an Afghan anthropologist. Currently, he is doing research in Indiana State University. His research is about Afghan Kyrgyz in Afghanistan, and he is mostly focusing about pastoral nomadism, trade and barter, craftsmanship among Afghan Kyrgyz. Another writer is Ted Kalahan, which he wrote a very interesting paper about Afghan Kyrgyz, which is called The Kyrgyz of the Afghan Pamir Raidon, where he is mostly discussing the economic challenge, aid and development, resilience, and so on. And one of the very recent research about Afghan Kyrgyz is by Tobias Marshall. So he is talking about remoteness and the image with the Afghan Kyrgyz have from themselves. So actually, I didn't want to go deep to the integration theory, the economic adaptation theories. Just I wanted to highlight a little bit about the specific work which is done about Afghan Kyrgyz. And specifically our research work is about the economic adaptation strategies of Afghan Kyrgyz resettled in Kyrgyzstan. Why I was interested in this? Because in Afghanistan, the Afghan Kyrgyz, they were mainly living in Pamir. And geographically speaking, that area is very high from the sea level. And from another side, that area is very cold. And the geography is somehow impacting the livelihood. And now when they were resettled near Bishkek, in Osh, in other areas, my main question was how the Afghan Kyrgyz adapted economically, what kind of strategies they employed to adapt in the new environment, which provide more opportunities, which is like different comparing to the Pamir in Wakhan of Afghanistan. So our research question was how Afghan Kyrgyz adapted economically in a new setting and what strategies they employ. Yeah, to explore these questions, to this research question, I did an ethnographic field research. On August 2024, I lived for 10 days in Taldiso village in Alaiwali in Osh, and this is the pictures which showing me with the people. Actually, this picture is in Jailu. The people who live in Central Asia, they may know. Jailu, it's a kind of pasture land. And also in May 2025, me and my partner, my colleague Malika, we went to Karabalta and also Narin to continue the research. We did participant observation and observation from villages, houses, lands, pasture lands, school and masjid, which is like mosque. We conducted 10 in-depth interviews, and most of them continued between 20 to 15 minutes. Our participant was active economic groups, people between 21 to 61 years old. We had in our group nearly 8 male and 2 female. There was some limitation accessing the female, but at least we could reach them. And we had one group discussion. What we found is regarding the economic adaptation strategies of Afghan Kyrgyz could be categorized into 2 big groups or 2 factors or 2 strategies. The first factors or strategies are actually we explored how Afghan Kyrgyz themselves played a role in economic adaptation. We explored the agency of Afghan Kyrgyz. Here we explored their employment strategies, the role of Afghan Kyrgyz women, and also how they interacted with the government in Kyrgyzstan. And then we explored the passive factors or passive strategies, which mainly we discussed the geography and also the support of the Kyrgyz Republic, the scope of the support and how it contributed to adaptation. So before going to the findings, let me show you these 2 very short graphs. The first graph shows the education background of our interviewees, which mainly most of them had some kind of basic religious studies. Some of them had no studies, some of them very basic education in general. Some of them studied sometime in Kyrgyzstan, sometime in Afghanistan, and then continued in Kyrgyzstan. And some of them also like this. And also regarding their skills, most of them were livestocker or sheepherds. We had laborers among, we had very few driver, like one person, and construction builder teacher. So overall, these two pictures suggest that mainly they were not too highly educated and they were not highly skilled, but their main skill was livestock. But among them, there was some people which they had technical skills. Yeah, one of the first interesting findings shows that the Afghan Kyrgyz, while they were resettled in Kyrgyzstan, they actually used their initial skills. They provided very quality work with lower price. For example, there was one Afghan Kyrgyz, which he was a construction worker, and he was offered a job in the market. And when he received this job, he did the job in a best possible way. And the price or his salary was also very low. Because of that, he continued his job and he did his best to keep this job. What I want to say is here, what I want to suggest, or what our research suggests is here, that the Afghan Kyrgyz, they used their own skill, but provided this skill in a very lower price comparing to the labor market in Kyrgyzstan. And they provided very quality work. Like they work instead of 8 hours, 10 hours. Like instead of getting a very high salary of 15,000 Kyrgyz som, like they accepted 30,000 Kyrgyz som. And the second findings regarding the employment show that they grasped any available opportunity. Like while I was talking with an Afghan Kyrgyz in Osh, which is very like kind of rural area, he said like while he came here, he used the opportunity to collect the sheep and livestock from others and to take care of them. And from that way, he is like getting the salary. And then the third point, which is I think much more interesting, is which they utilized their social network or ancestral network. The people, why the Afghan Kyrgyz were resettled in Osh or Alai in south of Kyrgyzstan? Because their fathers and their ancestors were like fled from that area to Afghanistan. And when they returned back to that area, they found their relatives like very past relatives, and through them they found the jobs. Yeah, the role of Afghan Kyrgyz woman. My colleague, Ms. Malika, will talk more about this.
So Afghan Kyrgyz women, so they, in Pamir, they mostly work at home, like baking bread and cooking, and they didn't have other opportunities to work. For example, in Badakhshan, it's super far from Pamir. The female, they have a job as a teachers. But when they came to Kyrgyzstan, they involved in tailoring and sewing. So because of government support, and also government provided sewing machines. And also there's some organizations, international organizations, they provide trainers for Afghan Kyrgyz women. So, and then they got also certificates for their skills, and they started to work as producing their clothes and sell it. And also the Afghan Kyrgyz, for example, they started to be engaged in farming and livestock because they were settled in Alai, and it's very cold place, and only for, so what they can do is just farming and having this livestock work. So, and also Afghan Kyrgyz, they start to be active in economic roles. And for example, one informant shared that she, when she talked with local people, she understands so they can get house. Because for example, in Alai, the old families, they got houses from the government, but in Narain and Karabalta, they didn't have, because they didn't want to go to Alai region. They decided to stay in northern part of Kyrgyzstan. That's why they didn't have houses, and they decided like to work in a governmental sphere. Why? Because so they can easily get the opportunity to buy house by governmental mortgage, so they can buy, for example, a house, and they can pay like for 10 years monthly some amount. But one family shared that they had an opportunity, they had a turn when they could buy, but the bank and this program decided that they cannot afford it. That's why what they did. So because only one woman, she worked in the mayor's office as a cleaner. So, and then after that, she talked with her husband and asked him to leave this construction work and work in governmental sector, like as a security. And so he left. And then she also asked her daughter, elder daughter, she like graduated college, and they decided to not let her continue her higher education and let her work in kindergarten. Also, it's governmental kindergarten. So next time when their turn will come, so they will be able to buy house from the government, like a mortgage program. So, and this case, so women also they started to be active, so and try to find opportunities to be able to buy houses, because they want to buy not only for themselves, therefore for their future, for the children also. And this was one of the example. Next. So also Afghan Kyrgyz, they raised their voice through, for example, they went to Bishkek and they approached some officials and told them about their situation. That, for example, they want more opportunities to work, and they also like they're also doing like farming, but they want their female family members could also work, and the officials, they gave them sewing machines, because the women can sew and become tailors. So now the Afghan Kyrgyz women, so they can make between 500 and 600 song per day, and sometimes it's 10,000 per month. It's like $120. Yeah. And so the passive factor, it's geography. So from Pamir to Pamir, right? Because first, it's like similar weather pattern of Alai Valley and Pamir. Also, the appropriate place for livestock, but there's a disadvantage, that mobility and opportunity. When we talk with families, they share that they were expected that they will go like to bigger cities, and they will leave this style of life when they used to work in farm, in farming or the livestock. They wanted to work in new positions, or to gain new knowledge and skills, but they went from the same place to the from one place to the same like conditions what they had already, because they wanted also have better future for their children. And Alai, also my colleague mentioned that it's ancestral land of Afghan Kyrgyz. That's why the government official, they saw that, for example, our first president, Akizhanov, he mentioned also that we have Afghan Kyrgyz, they live in Pamir, so and they are from Alai regions, so it would be better to let them come back. And also 1999 officials in parliament mentioned they had like some initiatives, and official mentioned the Chongalai region, so it's would be a good place for them to live and settle down. Also, the special factor what helped them to economically adaptate, it's first what Kyrgyz government support them. First is travel expenses from Afghanistan to Kyrgyzstan. Second is they in Alai region, they gave them houses, design houses, so we can see here. So mostly the same style of all of them, they have same style of house. And then they gave them livestock package. It's like 1 horse and 10 sheep and 1 cow. as I mentioned, they didn't expect that they will come back the same lifestyle, but yeah, they got all this and lands. But lands is just where they can get grass for animals, but not for agriculture. And also they got a monthly stipend for children and elderly people. It's 2,000 som per month. It's $23. And 6 is kind of health insurance, but they always need to tell the doctors in hospitals that they are Afghan Kyrgyz. So, and after that they will provide lower prices, so maybe without payment. And school, for example, in this place. Okay, yes, please, Farhad.
Okay, actually, we opened the discussion, and I would like to shortly highlight that the case of Afghan Kyrgyz is very interesting in understanding the larger geopolitical games which were taking place in the history of Central Asia and Afghanistan. And while I was exploring the economic adaptation of Afghan Kyrgyz, I found out that the adaptation or the economic adaptation is not something linear, and it's not something uniform. It is shaped by a couple of issues like cultural continuity, social networks, state support, and economic realities, which is available in the new environment. But what's interesting is that despite problems and challenges with Afghan Kyrgyz which faced, these community showed a very strong resilience. They utilized their past experiences, ethnical ties, and gender-based adaptation strategies to somehow make their livelihood. So this study that we have done, it's shows that adaptation for displaced pastoral communities, specifically for Afghan Kyrgyz, is a kind of negotiation between tradition and transformation, shaped both by agency and structure. The Afghan Kyrgyz themselves play a role, and also the structure, which it could be in the form of state support, or it could be in the form of new realities in the region or the culture. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. That was excellent. Thank you for sharing. And again, I have a whole list of questions that now I'm getting very excited to ask. So I really appreciate that presentation, and I'm liking how the themes of this panel, even though we didn't plan it this way, are coming together. And to finish up, we'll hear from Mirlan Bektursunov at Hokkaido University, the National Institute for the Humanities there, and he will take us back to the 1920s and 30s to talk about lineages and loyalties, Kyrgyz elites, and the Soviet order.
Thank you, Nicholas. Thank you. Can you hear me? So, wait a minute. Okay, thank you. We have 20 minutes, yeah? My name is Mirlan. I'm currently based in Japan. I have two affiliations. First is Hokkaido University, Slavic Erosion Research Center, and then the next one, the National Institute for the Humanities. So I'm historian. I'm historian. I studied the history of Central Asia, mainly focused on the nomadic societies, Kyrgyz and Kazakh. So today's discussion will be about the Kyrgyz. Up to this point, in my research, I was mainly focusing on the local level Kyrgyz lineage society, but and from now on, I want to try to analyze how these lineages, different groups, structured society, and national elites, political elites, cultural elites, how these lineage factors affected the relationship between within the political local elites and their relationship with their center, with the Moscow. So So this is the content of today's talk and introduction. I suppose today's in this session the historian only is Nicholas, yeah. So I would go very simply by not going into details too much. So lineages in today's nation state world, like they are not well perceived. They often viewed as obstacles to the national unity. So, and the same was in the Soviet period. The lineages were described as backwards survivals of the past, and they were targeted for systematic removal from the social life. Today's contemporary Soviet Central Asian studies scholarship mainly focuses on how these local elites interacted with the Moscow, with the central power, and how their relationship, how they experienced this the Soviet system. So mainly focusing on the national level political elites. And I'm posing here is the question that, so the relationship between the local political elites in Moscow is very important to look at the Soviet experiment, but at the same time to grasp these nuances of the Soviet system of Central Asia within the Soviet system is to understand not only local elites relationship with Moscow, but relationship within these local elites themselves. So if we talk about the local elites, intra relationship within the local elites, then in Kyrgyzstan's context, it's lineages. So you know that Kyrgyz society and Kazakhstan and Turkmen are structured by the patrilineal descent groups. So it was a main identification factor in the beginning of the 20th century and remained throughout the Soviet Union. So and this raises the question: how did the local political elites perceive and engage or navigate this double pressure? On the one hand, is a lineage factor, their identification, and the other hand, it's a growing this ideological and discursive reality of the Soviet regime. So the Soviets tried to make a very loyal communists from every person. You know, all the there's a huge literature on how that this state, the Soviet state, is a mobilizational, interventionist, in the Adib Khalid's words. It tried to regulate everyday's life to make from the population loyal socialist and communist citizens. But on the other hand, the local life in Kyrgyz society was governed by the so-called customer law. We say in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan is adap. Particularly in Kyrgyz language, it would be narh and namus. So, what does it mean? Narh? Narh was it's a law, it's a customer law which regulated the relationship between the lineages, mainly families, and namus. Namus is more related to the honor of the lineages and individuals. So there was no written source of this narh and namus. This was the practiced. It's in everyday life. It was practiced and transferred from generation to generation orally. This examples of the narq and namus, the detailed concepts on the Kyrgyz language. For example, let's take a san. In Kazakh, it will be saun. So it's a practice when that wealthy family members give to their more poor relatives their cow and other cattle for some period. And these poor relatives will use this cattle for their benefits. So instead, they will, of course, help their wealthy relatives and other practices like ashar and algo, or it's and ashar maybe more. Everyone knows about ashar. In Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, it's like the community comes together, and in the case is that different groups members comes together and help each other in agricultural and other works. So I will not go into detail. Bloodfeud and Kun. So there's a the take is that there's a customary law, there's a traditional laws which regulates the Kyrgyz society, and above on that comes the Bolshevik state with its insistence on the socialism, class-based society, and other communism related discourses. So the Soviet state was, as you know, the state of Soviets. Soviets means the councils. It was structured from the village level to the district, city, province, republic, and union. On every level, there was a councils elected from the population. These councils were filled mainly by the workers, and in some case, intelligentsia. So in one example, so I'm trying to say about that, how these Soviet institutions were adapted to Kyrgyz realities. Yusuf Abdurrahmanov, he was in today's words, Prime Minister of Kyrgyzstan for nearly 7 years. And he, in one of his letters to Stalin, he says that these Soviet councils on the village level, we should build on the principle of the decent group. Why? Because when we do elect members to the local council, mainly the rich families, rich decent groups, relatives of rich decent groups, so representatives of rich lineages mainly get elected. So, and Abdurrahmanov reasons that despite their economic situation, every decent group should get their representative in the local villages. So it's the text written by Abdurrahmanov. I will not go into detail. So he didn't mention decent growth, but he says that economic goals. And economic goals, it's a fancy way to say about the decent growth, because you know within the with the Soviet period, everyone tries to not to say about lineages because it's a taboo. It's and we have an economic concept like economic goal, and economic goal is least minimal unit in the village, and the smallest unit in the village is a decent group. So let's us take to the structure of the lineage society of Kyrgyz people. Uru, it's called in Kyrgyz. It's some scholars say it's a national level lineages. there's a different level of lineages. So Uru is like national level there, and there's a 40, and it's said that there's a 40 of them. And the next level, it's a Uruk. It's like from 4 to 8 generations. People grouped in this Uruk level. And then in the smallest level, it's Biratan Baldare, which literally translates as children of one father, which groups from 2 to 4 generations. And when Abdurrahmanov mentions about the economic village, economic aul, he mainly says about Biratan Baldare. So in everyday politics, in everyday life, those Biratan Baldare who are more economically stronger, those decent groups who are more economically capable, they basically dominate the local politics. So this I tried to give a schematic picture of the lineage society. So it's in the yellow one, it's a big one, the national level lineages. It's for example, let's take that on the example of Shabdan Jantayulu. He's a very famous chieftain. For example, Shabdan's national level lineage would be Sarbaghish. And his Uruk would be Tunai. So it's it's a big subdivision within the Sarbaghish. And then within the Tunai subdivision, there's one very prominent decent group, which called Jantai. So Shabdan's father is Jantai, and Jantai's sons, Jantai's family is most influential family within the Tunai at that time. And I also I want to look at that, not how the national elites, political elites pursued, and so how these lineage and Soviet structures intermingle with each other. I wanted, so it's also on the local level, and I give here the example of 2 decent groups, Biratan Baldari, Keldike and Chigir. They belonged to the one sublineage named Buganak within the Mongoldor national level lineage. And one of them was more wealthier. It's in this case the Keldike, and Chigir was more poor. And when the Soviet period began, there was economic reforms, and within these economic reforms, there was land and water reform of 1920s. And within this land and water, during this land and water reform, Soviet authorities on the spot more favors the poorer Chigir decent groups. Why? Because Soviets stood for the Batraks, for the Bidnyaks, and etc. So Keldike for them is like a nomadic version of feudals. And the case study of Keldike and Chigir ends with that Keldike controls all the local Soviet institutions, and when they perceived that their land was their traditional land use was taken and given to the Chigir, they would come out and say that why are you discriminating against us? Because we are more taxed. We have more cattle, and that's why we are paying more taxes, and that's why we are more useful Soviet citizens than the Chigir. So it's a Keldike's discourse. It's very interesting because Keldike it's a decent group, and they are using the Soviet language of citizenship and class based, yes, class-based discourse. Then I wanted to more in detail talk about that Ibrat Toychinov's case. Those who from Kyrgyzstan knows very well about Ibrat Toychinov. He's one of the first generation of Soviet Kyrgyz elites. He served in the local Communist Party in different positions within the government. And he comes from the, again, Sarbaghish lineage, but from different descent group, subdivision. So there was a in Narin in Narin Canton, there was a single county. Within this single county, there was a man, tribal chieftain, Qazi Chokoğlu, who served as a county chairman for the last 30 years. And when Ibrai comes to the power in the early years of Soviet rule, he began to criticize tribal chieftains, and among them Qazi Chokoğlu. And it's very interesting because Qazi and Ibrai are the cousins in the third generation. So, or both hails from the Sarbaghish, and there's a Ryskulbek subdivision within the Sarbaghish, but they are their grandfather is different. So in Qazi's case, it's a Hokkaido. In Ibrai's case, it's a Shambet. But their grandfather, Ryskulbek, is the same person. So despite this closeness with the Qazi, Ibrai began to criticize Qazi for his manap and tribal chieftainship, and eventually succeeds in removing Qazi Chokoğlu from Kyrgyzstan and sending him to Russia. So and more interestingly, after Qazi Manap was removed from the Kyrgyzstan, who comes to Qazi's position as a local tribal chieftain comes the main local tribal chieftain after the Qazi becomes Toychu, who was the Ibrai's own father. So you see this dynamic relationship within this same subdivision, and how Soviet activist, political activist Ibrat Toychinov was using the Soviet institutions and Soviet discourse removes the Qazi, his cousin, tribal chieftain from Kyrgyzstan, and accidental or not, his father becomes the main tribal chieftain in Narin, in Ehsani County. So, I will pass this part and jump to conclusion. There's a very wonderful scholar named Igor Cherstich. He says that he mainly focuses on the Libya. He says that tribes flexibly use, ignore, or manipulate ethnic and tribal discourses depending on the context to navigate social reality. And I think that's the case in the early Soviet Central Asia too. Central Asian studies have focused on political elites and their ties to Moscow, but have largely overlooked how these political elites interacted with each other, and how they especially navigated this lineage-based, lineage-structured society. So to understand how these elites interacted with each other, we must analyze inter-lineage relations. And this requires, I think, knowing on which level the given political activist is operating, on the level of a national level, Uru, or in the level of the Uruk, the subdivision level, or in the level of the children's one father, Biratan Baldare. So because more the lesser goes to the smallest unit, the more decent group is united. So lineages climb unity.
Like 30
Yes.
seconds, Mirlan,
Yes,
so that we
yes,
have time.
yes.
Yeah.
The lineages, despite they climb to unity, especially I'm not saying about that lineages are so unified, they have one agenda. So lineages, depending on their level, it's can be very fluid. They can expanded, excluded members from their own circles to get the economic and political power. So their rivalries didn't exist outside the state discourse. Instead, lineages and their representatives actively appropriated Soviet norms, discourses, and ideology. In doing so, they advanced their own goals, lineage goals, decent group-based goals, and at the same time, they upholded state and narratives. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mirlan. That was really wonderful and in a wonderful way to round out this really fascinating panel. And I know that we're coming from different disciplines, but I gotta say I'm really excited to see how our interests are coming together. And I would propose something, which is next year we all get back together and develop a coherent panel together, because I think a lot of us are interested in the same kind of questions. And on that note, I'm just going to give a few big points and questions, and then give each of you a few individualized questions, and then let you take over. Also, if there are questions that you have for each other or for our audience members, those of us who woke up really early or came late, feel free to put those in the chat. So one of the big questions that I see uniting this panel, uniting the papers on this panel, is the question of the mode of production, right? We have agriculture, we have the use of irrigation to grow different crops, we have nomadism versus construction and various kind of informal labor jobs. So my big question is why does this matter? Do you see the role of different types of agriculture, different types of land relations, different types of selling of one's labor on the market dictating or shaping the way that inequality develops, or the adaptation strategies of resettled people or women in rural Uzbekistan? So does the things that we're producing or selling matter? Secondly, I'm curious, because this is CES. I'm curious to hear that for the most part, these were not just post-Soviet stories, but these were global universal stories, where people we were kind of moving past the Soviet legacy. But I wonder if there are moments where this is a post-Soviet story. Does the local context of post-Soviet Central Asia, this is less for Mirlan, but for the others, there the Soviet case matters very greatly. But I'm curious, in which ways are these post-Soviet stories, and in which ways are these more universal stories about the history of nomadism, the history of neoliberalism, or the history of water management in developing economies? Again, take that or leave that. I would be curious to hear what you guys think. And then finally, and this mostly relates to our second and third presentations, but how do these identities, including gender, nationality, ethnicity, class, intersect with the way that people are experiencing inequality, resettlement, and the other problems that were talked about in the various papers? You know, I think we heard a little bit about this in the paper on the Afghan Kyrgyz, but I would be curious to hear what the reception of the local community, aside from the government institutions, was for those Afghan Kyrgyz. And we heard from you, Gulnoza, about the importance of gender, but I also wonder if ethnicity matters in these contexts. Yeah, I'll leave it at that, but I'd like to quickly go through a few questions for each of the panelists. And I'll try to go lightning fast. So, Dr. Akizhanov, I really enjoyed this. I found this a really refreshing presentation because it's not very often that we hear these kinds of perspectives and really cutting and critical analysis of rising inequality or extreme inequality in the post-Soviet Central Asian space. So I really appreciate that. I was curious about UBS. You mentioned this. You mentioned their analysis being really good. I'm not familiar with that. Could you fill us in a little bit about what UBS is? Is it? I think it's some kind of bank or something. And why you think their analyses are so accurate. And then I was relating to my first big question. I'm curious about we didn't hear much about, maybe because you assume we know about it, but the economy and where the source of this concentrated wealth in Kazakhstan is. I assume it's gas exports. I think you mentioned that, but I'm curious if you could just talk a little bit more about how the fact that the economy hinges on the export of a natural resource might actually be related to this question of wealth concentration. Um, yeah, I have more, but I'll leave it at that just for the sake of time. But maybe we can talk more at another point. And then Gulnoza, I really enjoyed this presentation. I liked the focus on the locality and that you were doing these very localized interviews to tell us about how migration is affecting local land and water use relations in rural Uzbekistan. So I wanted some more clarity on what these women were doing. So you kind of had two categories of land use, right? You had the small scale farmers who are often using the kitchen plots, but then you had these big farmers. So are the women that you're interviewing mostly selling their labor to work on bigger farms? And if so, isn't this like, I'm curious then about why the focus is just on water when it seems like land access is also a huge part of your story. And I know you mentioned that briefly, but it seems to be a really important part of this story. And then I was also curious about the timeline here because you mentioned this as being a problem that's um, increasing since migration has become widespread in Uzbekistan. So in the last like 20 to 25 years. But maybe there's a longer history of this. I mean, was it the case that women had more access to control over water resources before migration? Or is it just that because they now play a bigger role in the water management? You mentioned that this was primarily a man's job before the migration wave. Is it the case that it's now becoming more clear because women do play a greater role in the water management, but they still have that lack of access to power? So I would just be curious about your thoughts about that if you have anything to share. Okay, and then moving on to our third presentation. Um, uh, Malika and Farhad, thank you so much. This was another interesting story. I'm curious how you see this relating to like a broader history of resettlement of nomadic populations in the 19th and 20th century, because even within the Soviet case, this is something really familiar. These dynamics are at play basically for the whole 20th century. If we look at Tajikistan, right, the forced resettlement from highland to lowland is one of the main stories of Soviet Tajikistan. Um, but also globally, I mean, we could talk about the decline of nomadism in the 18th, 19th, and 20th century as being part of the story of modernity. So, what's new here? And also, how does this fit into the bigger history of of I don't know, dispossession of land, proletarianization, and I don't know. I think there's a lot familiar here, so I would be curious to hear you talk about that. And then, yeah, oh my gosh, there's so much here. but I guess I would want you to elaborate a little bit more about the social networks, how they were useful, and how those, like, what were the connections between the land that they left and the places they were coming, and like was it a complete break from their connections in Afghanistan, or was there more of a circular logic here where people connected with people back in Afghanistan and then they connected them with other people who had come to Kyrgyzstan? I'm curious about that connection to Homeland, both through these social networks but also maybe individually, like did people profess a longing for the place that they left, or did they imagine that one day they'll be able to return? Again, this maybe shows my lack of familiarity with the situation. And then, yeah, Mirlan, thank you so much for this deep dive into the 1920s and 30s. You know, what's interesting hearing Malika and Farhad's presentation and then your presentation is we see two sides of a similar process about the importance of lineage and kinship in nomadic societies. The Soviets saw this as a potential, or sometimes saw this as a potential threat to their own ability to rule. But in the case of Malika and Farhad, we see that this is a source of strength for the communities themselves. So my questions mainly are about the extent to which because this is a very localized society. I'm curious to the extent, is the story that the Soviet government in Moscow and other places, even in Tashkent, didn't really understand reality on the ground and they were being hoodwinked by these local elites? I mean, is that the story that you want to tell? Also, I'm curious about all of these terms that you bring in, such as san, kuch, ashar, kun. You know, Hashar is the only one that we all recognize because the Soviet Union sees this as really useful, you know, a way to get people to go dig a canal or whatever. Um, are they aware of these other terms, and how are they talked about in the ideological press of the 1920s and 1930s? And then, yeah, you talked a little bit about the land reform and how this, some people took advantage of it, other people suffered because of it. How does this story, how far does your story go, and what does collectivization look like for these informal institutions of kinship and um, lineage? And then finally, just a literature recommendation. Flora Roberts, have you read this dissertation? Okay, so I don't need to say any more. But she looks at Khujandi elites and the way that they were incorporated into the Communist Party in Tajikistan, especially in north near Khujan in the north. Okay, I'll leave it at that. We have, oh my gosh, 10 minutes. Katya, are we allowed to go a little bit longer if we want? Okay, I think we can.
Of course you can. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
As long as everybody has the time to do it, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Well,
Nick. This is a fascinating panel, by the way.
I know. I'm hoping next year we can
Right.
plan it ahead of time, and you know, I'm also really excited because I study all of these things: agricultural, rural history, development in 20th century, all of these dynamics. So let's go for 20 minutes if that's okay with everyone, and that'll give each panel, each paper presentation 5 minutes to respond to some of these questions, including Julduz's question in the chat. So let's hear from you, Kuat.
Okay, thank you, Nicholas, if I may. So mode of production and as I understood the first question, like main reasons for this, the growth of wealth, right? Which kind of leads to this inequality. Well, I would argue that it's not the special case for Kazakhstan. It's almost all Central Asian countries and globally, you know, from countries as different as South Korea or United States, Germany or Kazakhstan, you know, this phenomenon of rising income inequality and wealth and gap between the rich and the poor is like something is phenomenon. And you know, people like Stiglitz and Krugman, and more recently, not recently actually, Piketty, Milanovic, they really made their name, you know, on this. So for Kazakhstan, there's nothing special, I would say, because the main reasons for such a outrageous income inequality is the pro-market restructuring, which has been in Kazakhstan and many countries implemented in accordance with the so-called Washington Consensus. And that is also a part of neoliberal ideology. The so-called, I understand that many people may not be acquainted with this, but it's a kind of a stage of a new form of capitalism, you know, because very shortly, you know, between 1940s and 1970s, the capitalist countries were mostly kind of lived through the so-called golden age of capitalism. And this is not irony. This is a capitalism which was constrained by social democratic institutions where the efficiency of market economy or capitalism were constrained by, in a good sense, by this those institutions which would provide and guarantee and maintain the egalitarian redistribution of wealth. Okay, and by 1980s, for different reasons, we don't have time to discuss this neoliberal ideology, you know, became dominant gradually in the so-called global north, in global south. In 1980s, 1990s, they were imposed on many countries under the structural adjustment programs of IMF and World Bank. I mean, it's a long story, but scholars like David Harvey,
can I interject real quick? So really what I want to, so to me, what's really striking is you said something like 120 people control 50% of the wealth in Kazakhstan. That seems really extreme to me, even for neoliberal concentration of wealth. And I was kind of curious if you could elaborate why that's the case. Like, what's unique about the Kazakhstan case, or maybe you really don't think it's unique. That was what was driving my question.
It is not unique. I mean, the whole Trump administration consists of billionaires. Okay, and you know if you read the Oxfam report, every year they come up with all these astonishing numbers how less than 40 people, you know, own as much as half of the global population. Okay, global population. There is other estimates showing that there are more money, the number of money, the quantity of money now, literally hoarded in offshore. The amount of money is enough to eradicate global poverty 3 times. 3 times, okay? So this is just to show you the global context that Kazakhstan is not alone, so to speak, unfortunately or fortunately. So, but in case of Kazakhstan, as many other economies, the way I'm mentioning neoliberal ideology or restructuring is that neoliberal ideology, in words of David Harvey, led to this the so-called accumulation by dispossession, when all this restructuring, basically all about privatization, commodification, and later by 2000s financialization, another political economy term, which is comparatively new one. You know, basically when the finance dominates all sectors of life, and Kazakhstan is also like ahead of many states, so to speak, because so basically this provided the context for the new economy. And I would say from this pro-market restructuring that led to completely redefining the local economy into the rentier state. So in addition to the problems that we face, this issue of the so-called Dutch disease, I mean, it's more economic, but in the political economy terms, it's a resource curse, right? When, you know, country literally from economic perspectives doesn't need to diversify its economy, the elite is not interested in making economy complex. And again, for non-economists, you know, the more complex the economy, the better. It means that you export, you know, high value added products and so on. But Kazakhstan was pretty much diversified economy by 1989 or 1991. I mean, by many standards. I mean, we're not talking about competitiveness, but, you know, produced a lot of different things, okay? Whereas now we completely rely on that. And this is the definition of the rentier state. And rentier notion was described by classical economists such as like Keynes, who said that, you know, rentier is something harmful for the economy because rentierism does not produce does not lead to the production of value. Okay,
Right.
it's
right.
making money out of money. It's a parasitic
Yeah.
way of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So that's what
Let's
we ended
leave
up
it
now.
on. Let's leave it on that. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. But yeah, I really appreciate this perspective. Like, I hope we can continue this conversation. So thank you so much. Gulnoza, let's.
You also mentioned UBS. If you're interested, just UBS was just an example to show that the Kazakh economy, being comparatively small compared to other global economies, but UBS mentioned Kazakhstan among 3 top countries where the wealth is like, where you should make wealth.
I see.
And
I
UBS
understand.
is a bank, okay? So these are not the progressive guys, who like this is an example,
Yeah.
how unequal the redistribution patterns in Kazakhstan. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I have to apologize, Nicholas, with your permission and with permission. I have my flight at 5 a.m.
Yeah. Please, with
So
our
if you don't
blessing.
mind, I will have to leave.
Yeah.
So
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Kuat.
everybody. Good luck.
Good luck.
Is Dr. Akizhanov able to answer Joseph's question just real quickly?
Oh, sorry. What was that?
Joseph's question in the chat, is he able to address that? How?
Oh, right. If
What
you
did you
have
use to
time, there's a
measure?
chat. There's a question for you in the chat. I can read it out loud. In your research, how do you define and measure socioeconomic status, SES? When you use terms like poor and wealthy, what specific criteria or indicators do you rely on?
Well, there are officially defined criteria. What is poor? What is inequality? So the very average kind of parameter would be Gini coefficient, but Gini coefficient also kind of highly criticized because it's like a GDP per capita. It doesn't reflect, like Kazakh GDP per capita amounts to 14,800, but of course it's very average. It means that something between the lowest paid and between oligarchs. So, but we know that this is not the truth. So with social, fortunately, there are many new, indexes nowadays, not only competitiveness or economic complexity, but even social progress index, even index of happiness, So there's so many, and basically they measure beginning, or even the classical one, Human Development Index, it shows a very simple one. It has only literally 3 parameters, like life expectancy, literacy rate, and life expectancy at infantry or something of infants. But now it's much more complex, beginning from the quality of water, the access to water, and many others. So these are all parameters basically help you to understand whether this GDP growth or economic growth really translates into the social economic benefits of the whole population.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, so we're still on track to give everyone a little bit of time. So, Gulnoza, would you like to respond to any of the questions I raised? And if anyone else has questions, now would be a good time to drop them in the chat.
Thank you for this opportunity. I will try my best to cover all questions. So the first question, I think it's not related to my research. What does it matter what farmers sell in the market? I don't know. About water management in development economies. So my literature review suggests that other issues female farmers face in Uzbekistan are somewhat similar. There are similarities across development economies. If I understood the question correctly, there was a case in Vietnam when also female farmers losing land or crops because of poor access to water, and so some Indian states as well. How does gender class intersect with inequality or access to resources? Very interesting question, because I actually used intersectionality framework in my research. And while the population is quite homogeneous, we don't have ethnic minorities, I could differentiate between marital status, age, and class. So as I mentioned already, household farmers and smallholder farmers without a male partner were at the bottom of the value chain in access to resources, and were more likely not to have access to water and lose their crops because of that, and were more likely to be involved in informal labor as smart workers in rural areas. People engage in such kind of seasonal opportunities. It's like harvesting, weeding, ploughing. The earnings are very seasonal. They are informal and therefore not protected by any legal, they don't have any legal protections, therefore subject to exploitation and other related issues. Was access to water better before migration? I can say I didn't have this historical comparative analysis, but I can refer to UNDP research conducted in 2015, where it stated that men were more likely to make decisions about what crops to grow and about water management, while women were more likely to make decisions about when it's time to weed, to harvest, and also they were completely in charge of the household kitchen plots. Do women have better access now or just have to engage more? I think it's the second one, because they have to engage more. When men leave, de facto women's burden just triples. They have to take care of their children, of their extended families, and of these farms, and have to engage in all the aspects of this farming, including water management. Yes, there are issues with land ownership. As I said, women are underrepresented in land ownership and in business ownership as well. And the thing, yeah, I think I covered all questions.
Yeah, you did. Thank you so much. Really great presentation, and I look forward to talking more about this. Yeah, I also sent you some other people I know who have done similar work in Tajikistan. You might want to check them out. I sent it to your chat. Okay, Malika and Farhad. However you want to handle the questions, yeah.
Okay. I received 3 questions and I would like to address them. The first one, how local people received the Afghan Kyrgyz. I think it is a very interesting question. While I was talking with the Afghan Kyrgyz, they had different experiences. But what I see as a trend is that they were received with a sense of respect. For example, most of them said that you kept your religion, and while they were returned back to Kyrgyzstan, they were teaching other Kyrgyz in Kyrgyzstan, the religious staff, like when they had a problem in terms of religion, Islam, or asking some Islamic questions, they were coming to Afghan Kyrgyz to ask them, because they were saying, like, you lived in Afghanistan, you have more information, and while we were under the Soviet, we lost many of our values and religion, information and studies. And in other ways, so they were like received as Kyrgyz, like it was not something different, but they had a kind of like a supportive approach toward the Afghan Kyrgyz. But politically speaking, while I was reviewing some of the magazines and so on, I found out that there are 2 narratives regarding the Afghan Kyrgyz. The people in the government, they were using the case of Afghan Kyrgyz as a kind of support for a strong Kyrgyzstan, which the government was doing, while the critics were saying that they are also Kyrgyz, while we are like putting lots of money supporting them. So this is like in terms of that. Coming to your second question, like how we can connect this to a broader history. I actually, Mirlan is also here. He's a historian. I believe this is part of a nation building in post-Soviet Central Asia, where the states which they want to like emphasize more on identity, more specifically Kyrgyz identity, Kazakh identity, Uzbek identity, and so on. So I think this makes it special. While this new government was, while the new state was built, so they tried to bring the Kyrgyz even from Xinjiang, from Afghanistan, from Pamir, from this area back to Kyrgyzstan, showing that we have to make a stronger Kyrgyzstan. And it's also special because I'm also a geographer, that how the Afghan Kyrgyz in a new environment try to adapt in terms of livelihood, because in Pamir mostly they were doing livestock, but when it came to Kyrgyzstan they used different approach to find jobs and opportunities. Coming to your third question, coming to the social network, they kept their social network, and the matter of identity regarding the Afghan Kyrgyz is another topic that needs more exploration, because while I was visiting them, so they were speaking Persian, they were speaking Dari, the language of Afghanistan. So when I asked them, how do you feel? Most of them said, this is a very good country. Kyrgyzstan is a very nice country, but still Afghanistan is like our homeland. This is our ancestral land, but that is our homeland. We miss that. And in one case, it was very special. I faced that they were listening to an Afghan local song, which the content of that song was about being far from homeland and how painful it is that. So in that regard, so they always kept their social network in Afghanistan.
Do you know what was the song?
Actually, it is we have a local singer, Mir Maftun. He says Ajab Dunyast in Dunya. Yeah, Ajab Dunyast in Dunya. Like it is something, man. Like what kind of world is this? We are far from from family, from homeland, and so on and so forth. So they kept their social network, but they were building new network in Kyrgyzstan to adapt economically.
Mm. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And you were a minute under. Wow. Okay, we have exactly 5 minutes left for you, Mirlan.
Yes, I will.
And then I have to run to another panel.
I see, Nicholas. Thank you very much for organizing this session. Wonderful. I mean, thank you. We all thank you for this. Thank you for specific, very detailed questions related to my paper. You mentioned that there, I think there was 4 points in detail. So the first was you mentioned that your notes that lineage and kinship in nomadic societies as a source of strength. Basically, I'm trying to say this in my paper. It's not something which is backward, which is mainly framed by the Soviet state and still then stayed throughout the Soviet period and stays until now. It's not. It's before the coming of the nation state system in the early 20th century, this customary law perfectly worked for them, for the nomadic societies for thousand and thousand years. So, and it's a special, total different situation after coming of the nation state framework. So the extent to which the Soviets understood their local realities, they totally didn't understand anything about it. So they to whom did they turn when they came to Soviet Kyrgyzstan? They turned to the minority local Kyrgyz elites who were loyal to Bolshevik state for explanation of local matters. And these minority loyal elites took on a role to walk through these European bureaucrats through this complicated reality of a nomadic society. And at the same time, not forgetting to solve their own problems. I mean, the political agenda of their own group.
Do you think it changes in the 1930s?
No, it doesn't change. It didn't change. It didn't change. I'll come to in my next answer. So there's a different kind of terms in the Kyrgyz customer law, in Kazakh customer law, adapt and san, kuch, nark, namus, algo. It's just part of this, and so it's didn't understand about these concepts. And when but the local population still uses these concepts in a way to help their situation. So yeah, and the last question, land and water reforms and collectivization, it's a total disaster for the nomadic society. So my short answer to this would be that this revolution from above launched in the end of the 1920s and early 30s. It's a total destruction of nomadic economy. Because you know, from the case of Kazakhstan, that I will not touch about the land and water reforms, which began in 1921, 1922, then continues in 1927. So why it's a destruction? Because especially in nomadic societies, they didn't experience land as a given to one family. They use land as a communal land. So, and they never experienced cultivating land on the larger territories. So they use land as a substitute to the cattle breeding. And when you try to make from nomads in one day collective farmers, you get what you got in the case of Kazakhstan. There's a 1.5 million death, total destruction of the cattle numbers. In Kyrgyzstan's case, before the collectivization, there was 9 million cattle, and within the 3 years, there stands on the
I'm really sorry.
1.5 million.
I need
So
to run
I'm
off.
finished. Okay.
You can continue. But yeah, thanks everyone so much. Please be in touch. Hopefully next year we can organize a panel on rural Central Asia or political economy or whatever it is. But yeah, I really appreciated your all of the discussions. So take care, everyone. Hope to see you around the conference.
Thank you.